Love this podcast? Support it and sponsor today. Simply head to ozcastnetwork.com for details.
Communication is the key. Now let's think about it. We all need people. It doesn't matter what personality type you are. Even if you're an introverted type and you enjoy and are energized by your time alone, or you're an extroverted type and are energized by the outer world. In the last couple of years during COVID, we've all come to realize how important communicating with others face-to-face is for us as humans. Despite the recognition of the importance of face-to-face contact during COVID, quality interaction between humans is still deteriorating. Now, much of this is due to the advanced available technology. Not only has this disease separated us, but so have our phones and computers, with social media available on both and messaging via words rather than interaction in person. These days, our eyes are rarely raised above either of these objects. Think about it. Interestingly, studies show that people who listen to podcasts regularly are less addicted to their phones and generally more socially adjusted. Now, what we need to do now is to become aware of how we interact with the people around us, particularly our partners and our children. How many times do you talk to people while still looking at your phone? How often have you dismissed or been distracted from face-to-face verbal conversation because you just received a text message or a phone call? How does that make you feel when someone does this to you? Do you feel welcome and included? Or second best and unimportant? When someone looks at you and talks to you, you can feel the connection. When someone texts you with words, it's not the same. Did you know there's a part of the brain called the fusiform gyrus? That sole purpose is to understand facial expressions. We've evolved to make eye contact with people when we communicate. Start looking. As parents and partners, how much do we actually look at each other and our children and make eye contact and teach them the proper way for them to interact in their environment as they grow up? How often do you actually do that? Start counting the times from now and see what you find. I'm Kate Mason and welcome to Parenting and Personalities. This is the podcast that connects you to the ones you care about the most. Today we're talking about human connection with children who are autistic, on the autistic spectrum, or who have developmental delays, and the importance of a caregiver's connection and attention in this area of communication. There are many different models of treatment and help for ASD. Social relational treatments focus on improving social skills and building emotional bonds. Some social relational approaches involve parents or peer mentors. Today we're looking at the Developmental Individual Differences relationship-based model, which encourages parents and therapists to follow the interest of the individual to expand opportunities for communication. This means that the intervention values strong connections and relationships. It acknowledges that these are imperative to the mastery of social, emotional, and intellectual capacities. The Floortime model requires significant involvement and responsiveness from caregivers and therapists to model and facilitate meaningful opportunities for connection. Jake Greenspan is the owner of Floortime Centre. For the last 20 years, Jake has worked in the fields of education and child development. Thanks to his father, Dr. Stanley Greenspan, he was given the opportunity to learn from leaders in various fields which help children with their developmental learning and behavioural challenges. Hi Jake, welcome to the show. It's really great to have you here.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Now, can you tell me your story? I know that your father was the architect of the business, but tell me how the concept actually began and maybe how it might have evolved and changed over the years.
Absolutely, yeah. So my father was a very well-known doctor named Dr. Stanley Greenspan, who specialized in looking at children's social-emotional health. And back in the early 70s, he was actually the first mental health professional to say that children have emotional systems at birth. And actually he hypothesized and then later kind of proved through validating his theory that it's actually the emotional system that drives development. And we now know that social emotional interactions not only drive our social emotional health, but also neurological and physical health, and that the child caregiver interactions are necessary for full comprehensive overall health. And so he created first this model of identifying what social emotional health was. It was really a roadmap. And also before that, no one had really outlined what the stages of social emotional health were. And we just always assumed it was looking at certain symptoms like sharing and taking turns and flexibility. And those are kind of outcomes. But the real path that we go through is not just skill acquisition. It's a much more comprehensive development of these capacities and understanding of other people, seeing the world from their perspective and understanding what they're experiencing from their subtle nonverbal emotions, etc. And so he developed this framework. And then after that, and that was in the late 70s, in the late 80s, he developed intervention. And that's what everybody's heard of, Floortime.
Right.
Floortime is intervention. The DIR model is a model for identifying a child's goals as well as where they are within their unique developmental profile. So he focused on the model and the intervention. And as an individual, as a kind of a private clinician, he was teaching parents and professionals this throughout his career. And then when I actually started getting into the professional world, I started out as a teacher. I worked in a school that specialized in teaching children with learning challenges, and I had a classroom of 25 kids with ADD, ADHD, dyslexia, dysgraphia, and I was a single teacher in 6th and 7th and 8th grade. So it was, I had my hands full, to put it mildly. But what was actually very interesting about the experience was that I saw firsthand not just where the challenges lied, where or laid with these children, but also how the systems that were being put in place were meant to work around the challenges, not strengthen the weak areas. And so everything that we were doing in the school system was teaching children compensatory mechanisms to work around their planning and sequencing issues, around their executive functioning issues, versus actually improving the executive function. And so when I started learning with my father's work, and even prior to becoming a teacher, I'd worked with many of his colleagues, I started to understand that neuroplasticity is the thing that really allows us to continue to reorganize our brain throughout our entire lives, until our 60s and 70s even, are finding. So there's no reason we have to believe that our neurological kind of development is fixed and we have to work around challenges. Now, the other side of that, we can't just force someone to work through them either, right? Because they have to be a willing participant. And that's kind of where the two sides of these interventions kind of butt heads sometimes. But the reality is, when my father created Floortime, he found an intervention that really allowed children to naturally, within their comfort zone and voluntarily, strengthen these connections in their brain that allowed them to process information and respond to the world around them in a more developmentally appropriate manner. And so what we did in 2004, my friend and colleague Tim Bleeker, we created the Floortime Center. And that at first was just meant to be a source for additional education and support for families. Because my father was working with a lot of different types of families, and he was working with adults and adolescents and children, but specialized in pediatrics, where we were working with a variety of ages too, but we were really focusing on just the social emotional health. So we became social emotional experts very quickly, which is a field that really doesn't exist, to be quite honest with you. And it's unfortunate, because it's really one of the most important fields that should exist. We have mental health, we have social skills, but really they're not blending the two enough. So we became kind of experts at that and figured out what the best delivery mechanisms for this intervention were going to be. And over the years, we weren't testing it on the kids, we were figuring out what was yielding the best results. And we started off by just teaching the parents, and then offering therapy at our office. And then we started integrating occupational therapy and speech and language pathology and educational opportunities and mental health. And we put all of this together into one clinic. So we have this wraparound approach where we're providing now these programs. It's not services. It's really a program we designed for children with developmental differences. And that's not just autism. It's kids with autism, ADHD, just some learning and behavioral challenges, and a lot of kids that fit into a gray area that shouldn't be put on the autism spectrum, but for lack of a better label, oftentimes are.
Very true. A lot of the time you can actually fix the things that are on the spectrum without the child actually being autistic, can't you? It's not...
Exactly. And it's a challenge because, a lot of people, and I understand the value of having a term to kind of understand what's going on with a person or a child. But the truth is, if you understand child development, you don't always need that label, because the label really just, all it does is identify a minimum set of symptoms. It doesn't tell you what's actually happening internally.
Yes. So with the development of that program, did a lot of your father's work went into that with your work? Like, was it a combination?
Yeah, so his role, he wanted nothing to do with the business, which I respected, and I didn't want him to do anything with my business. And not needless to say, he still had his input at times.
Yes. Yeah.
But he was a private clinician. He had his own home office. And he wrote 40 books in his career and was the chairman of a number of nonprofits. And so he wanted to do his work, and he was more of an academic, cerebral guy. So the last thing he wanted to do was manage people,
right?
Which is the last thing most people want to do.
Very true.
But what ended up happening was he trained us. So he taught us not just what Floortime the intervention was, but the entire philosophy and how all these pieces fit together. And he gave us kind of these non-negotiable rules that everything we were going to do had to be guided by if we truly wanted to be this holistic kind of child development, social emotional center. And to the day, we still make every decision based on these rules because they not only got us here, but they've yielded the results that we're getting, which are, again, leading to outcomes that other clinics in our area aren't achieving, not because they're doing the wrong thing, but they just may not have the same knowledge base that we do. And so what ended up happening was we started figuring out, well, with the training he gave us, how we can modify the current kind of systems that are in place in most pediatric clinics. Because there's a lot of these outpatient services clinics. And in the beginning, we were kind of competing with them, but we really never wanted to because what we were doing was something different. We were trying to do something different at least. And so we started to figure out what it was that really differentiated us from them, whereas we weren't there just to provide an occupational therapy or speech therapy session once or twice a week and check goals off a list saying, I taught the child this skill. Because at the end of the day, those things typically are not very generalizable. And we're finding that these kids are actually capable of so much more, right? That may have been the best we could achieve for a while. But now that we have an understanding of what neuroplasticity is, and not only what it is, but how to achieve it, once these critical phases of development have closed down, well, it's not just about teaching a skill. It's instilling and encouraging and enabling an entire thinking process that then leads to different skill acquisition. And so if you can help a child develop the thinking process, not just the outcome, now they have a tool that they can use their entire life. If you just teach them one outcome, right, well now, unfortunately, they know one outcome and they don't know how to generalize that sometimes. So that was one of the most different things. And we had to reorganize our entire business model because we wanted to do things differently and really focus on a process over a product.
That's fantastic. So when someone comes to you or approaches you for your services, what do you do? What's your process of getting them in? Because we're talking about relationships today and relationship building, and that's what you're all about. So what happens? What's the process if a person was to come to you?
Yeah, and the first thing is that relationship. You know, my father used to say nothing can be achieved outside of a nurturing relationship. A nurturing relationship doesn't always have to be positive, right? Nurturing relationships involve boundaries and sometimes, it's doing things that are tough that kids don't like. But nonetheless, the net element is that it's nurturing and supportive. So that's where it starts. And myself, I'm kind of a parent educator. That's my role in the organization as well as one of the directors. And so I oversee the staff, but most importantly, I'm working with the parents and the children when they first walk through the door. Every family we work with, either myself or the co-director, Tim Bleeker, we always work with the families first before they even get to our therapist, because we need to know who this child is, who these parents are, what the family dynamics are, what has the child been through, what have they not been through. We need to see the whole picture in order to figure out what is going to be the best program for them. And we design an individual program for them after that. But before we get even to the design of the program, our main focus is to educate the parents, because we don't even want them to come into our office and start paying us for these services until we know they're doing this at home and they're confident in what they're doing at home. Because if they can't do this at home, then the therapy we're going to do at the office is not as effective, because they're not going to be able to manifest some of the same kind of techniques and philosophies at home. So in all of our onboarding with families is actually free. And this is kind of very different also from the field, because we didn't want parents to be faced with this price tag up front of something that they're learning for the first time when they don't even know how it's going to impact their child, right? And we didn't even know how long it's going to take to train them and how they're going to adjust to it, or even if it's the right fit, right? So we want to have all that information up front. We don't want the parents to have a financial commitment, and we want to make sure that they are seeing the impact that this can have before anything else. Yeah. And so we focus. I was just talking with a family today. They come into the office. I meet with them in person. I work with them with their child, either hands-on myself or I just coach them from afar, depending on the child's openness to me being present. Then I share with them the kind of my observations and feedback. They share with me theirs. And then they get to go home and practice more and send me a video of them doing it at home without my support. So I get to see how it happens in the home environment, how it happens at my office with all our equipment and tools. And then from all of that information and getting feedback from the parents, we design the program.
Many parents ask me, how do I talk to my kids? Do you struggle with this? How well do you really know your child? Knowledgeable communication is the key to successful bonding with your child. This is something I can help you with. I meet with parents all the time around this. So let's chat. Contact me at thepersonalitycoach.com.au. Okay, so they kind of go home and have a practice run.
Yeah.
And do you give them feedback on that again so that they can get the right feel around it? And do you find that some people will stay and some people will go because not making them, but it's a lot of time for a parent, isn't it, to do this kind of stuff. So when we talked the other day, there is a lot of parental involvement, which I think is fantastic. But for some people, they may not have the time or the inclination to do so. So when they go home, how long does it take a person to go, yep, this is definitely what I want, or not? Is there a kind of time frame?
We've modified our approach a little bit because we were kind of having probably a 60 to 70% kind of return rate, which again, it's not for everybody. But I did know that some of the families who were not following through were actually interested in following through when I met with them. Just something happened in the interim.
Right.
So our process is actually a lot quicker now because we didn't want necessarily life to come at you and you get distracted. While that's real, those things happen. If the more you do this, the more you get involved with it, the more you're likely to stay with it. Just like anything else. It's like getting a gym membership after New Year's, which everybody's going to start doing in a week.
They are.
Right? Everybody's going to go. If you go once, you're less, then take a week off, you're less likely to keep going. But if you go for a couple of weeks, you're more likely to keep it going. And so with the families, what we found is that the first meeting happens, let's say on a Tuesday. By that Thursday, 2 days later, they're supposed to send the videos. And then by that Friday or Saturday, I'm giving them more feedback in terms of an audio file. I give them a narrative as to kind of what I saw. And it's also time indexed. I give them pointers of things to look at in the video that they send me so they can see exactly what I'm referring to. And they can reflect on it because that's what I want them to learn to do. Because at the end of the day, they're going to have to be their own teachers in a manner of speaking. And so if we've been when we started making that shift to doing it within a 48-hour window from when we met them and really getting them to see that, hey, now I remember what we talked about at the office. Now I did it at home. Now I'm seeing my son. I literally just got an email today from a mom who I did this with last week who said her son's now following her around the house and wanting to play with her all the time for the first time ever as a 2.5-year-old.
Wow.
Right. And so, and this was a boy who was watching 3 hours of screen time a day and was completely disconnected. And now he's wanting to play with people and even being interested in other people when they go walking.
That's huge.
Right? There's a child who I saw in a video who had limited to no eye contact. Now, that's a quick turnaround. Now, I'm not saying all kids show that, but what we find is the more parents do this quickly, the more they start believing in it, the more they just start trying it, the more it has an impact. And that's the reward the parents need. They need to see that this is impactful for their child and that it's going to be successful and effective. And so now we have closer to an 80 to 90% return rate. And again, still there are plenty of families who either they don't have the inclination, as you said, which are the families we typically walk away. But the families that don't have time, we figure out a way to make it work.
Right.
Whether it is doing more stuff at our office temporarily, whether it's finding alternative support systems with a nanny or a grandparent or some other caregiver. Because the key is, yes, primary caregivers are essential, but I understand work and life are limiting. And so if we can find alternatives to get the total amount up, then we can still be successful.
That's great. So for the parent that joins the program, where do you go from there? Because like we're talking parental or caregiver involvement, and you're teaching the caregiver how to be involved and how to kind of play and interact with the child and follow their lead. So can you just give us an idea of that whole following the lead and playing? And when I was talking to you, I was saying to you, I couldn't do that. You know, the stuff that you were saying, it's not something that that we naturally do as parents. So, and, you know, with kids with developmental disorders too, you know, you've got a lot of focus and a lot of different things to concentrate on. So give us a rundown.
Yeah, no, it's tricky. And I'll tell you, it's harder for some than others. I'm not going to lie. I mean, It really is. It was hard for me. I was a math teacher in middle school. Okay. So I was used to going into a classroom with a lesson plan, with, you know, concrete handouts, materials, a very factual based curriculum in math, right?
Yep.
So
and definite answers.
Exactly. There was, again, definitive answers. So I then moved into this more abstract, kind of free flowing, you know, curriculum that seemed like it had no structure. Now, the reality is there is a definitive structure. It's just not as rigid as that of a math, curriculum.
Yes.
It's what we call dynamic structure. And so the structure are the goals, these bigger picture social emotional goals. But when we get into the intervention of following the lead, really that's part of our driving forces. First, we're going, where is the child developmentally? Are they 3 years old working from a 2.5-year-old age range developmentally, or are they 3 years old working from a 1-year-old age range developmentally? And we start at their developmental age, because just like a child entering math class, if I have a 7th grader who's coming into my pre-algebra class, but they don't know how to subtract, well, I can't teach them pre-algebra. We need to go back and learn basic arithmetic. And that happened in my math class, and I was expected to push them forward. And as we all know, that doesn't work. So it's the same thing with a child who's struggling with communication. Well, guess what? Communication has a trajectory just like learning math or reading. We start communicating pre-verbally, and then we communicate verbally. We communicate with facial expressions and gestures and body positioning and sounds and tonalities. And then we start using more symbols like pictures and words, etc. And so we have to first identify where that child is, and that's what we help parents do. Then when we actually start following their lead, we have to use that information to figure out what are they trying to do. So they could be holding up a car, but that car still may not be a symbol of an actual, motor or vehicle that you would drive to the store or school. Instead, it's just a rolling object that can go down a ramp or roll under the couch. But if we try to teach the child something that we want them to do that's age appropriate, unfortunately, now we're trying to teach pre-algebra when the child really needs arithmetic, right?
Yes.
So instead, if we follow and do exactly what they're doing and they roll the car and then we roll the car somewhere else, now we're following their lead. We're using the car the same way they used the car. We're not trying to teach them how to use it in an adult-led manner. We're doing exactly what they did. And it's hard because we also have to be good observers. We as parents and adults don't always like to observe because we think we know. Mm-hmm. And we do know a lot. Don't get me wrong. We know a lot more than sometimes we want to know. But when we're observing, we need to be paying attention to what is the child really telling us and showing us. And the information that they're going to give us there, some of it's subtle, is all the information we actually need to figure this out. And once we become in tune and develop that lens, which is something we teach parents, what is the child showing you when they start walking away, when they start flapping their arms, when they start spinning in circles? What does all of that mean? Well, we know exactly what it means based on each child. Each child it may be different, but we can tell exactly what it means for 95% of the kids we work with, and then we can follow their lead based on those needs that they're expressing.
Wow. So do you lead the parents through this path? And so the improvements, as they improve, you teach them how to continue leading the way?
Really good question. Yeah, and this is one of the challenges too, because we used to work with parents and we'd have kind of a very inconsistent pattern of education. And so they'd come to us and then 6 months later, or who knows, maybe even further down the road, they'd come back and say, well, I think we've plateaued. And I was like, we've definitely plateaued, but we actually plateaued months ago.
Yes.
And the key is absolutely every couple weeks you should be modifying things because you should be moving the ball forward, right? The challenge with what we're discussing is not only we're trying to help the child grow more rapidly than they might naturally be growing in terms of these areas, but we're also chasing a moving goalpost, right? Yes. It would be like, on the rugby pitch, the try zone keeps moving back, right?
Yes, yes. It's always on the move. Yeah.
It's always on the move because their peers are getting older and they're trying to catch up to where some of their peers are, if that is our set of goals. But we are also trying to identify their own learning speed and curve And these techniques can speed that up. So ultimately, we're running faster, but we're running faster after a moving object. So we have to be constantly adapting and changing. And that's where having someone like we had for my father when he was training us was instrumental for the first 5-6 years we were doing this. We were working with him every week, showing him videos, and he was giving us feedback, and that was necessary for us. And we do the exact same thing with parents. Yes. We try to do something weekly with most families so that we're constantly hearing what's going on, because there's going to be ebbs and flows. There's going to be plateaus and peaks and valleys, right? So we have to know which kind of phase the child is moving into and what's happening in their life. Because if they're dealing with additional changes, if they are stressed at school, if mom or dad is going through something, all of this is relevant for what's going to happen in terms of the big picture family dynamic.
We don't realize what an impact our interaction with them and what life kind of does. I mean, even in a normal situation, things change all the time, and parental interaction probably isn't always as good as it could be. And also, like you say, as adults, we almost think we know everything, and we don't listen, and we don't watch carefully, and we do tend to override stuff as well. Now, we're running out of time, but when I spoke to you last, I know that I'll be getting you back on the show, because you have so much to share, and there are so many things we can talk about. So can you just give us a couple of examples of success stories that you could just share with us?
Absolutely. Some of the best successes, certainly, I wouldn't say best success, some of the biggest successes have been with families who have really kind of just got their hands as dirty as possible in this approach. And that's a weird analogy, but they really have to dig in and stick their hands in the dirt. And because if we're not willing to really get down and integrate this on almost every level, because it's not just a 30-minute play session a day type intervention, it's really a philosophy that you integrate into your daily life, in addition to the 30 minutes a day with each caregiver doing these types of interactions, as well as possibly with therapy. And so we've had quite a few children, and again, I'm not going to say this is possible for all children. We've had quite a few children who have moved off the autism spectrum diagnostically. Now, I'm not saying that they were cured, because I know this can be a touchy subject, and nor is that our goal. But the reality is, our goal is to strengthen within their comfort zone, to strengthen their social emotional capacities. That doesn't mean teaching them to share. It doesn't mean teaching them to take turns, say hello, goodbye, and thank you. But when you focus on the bigger picture capacities, what social emotional health is, then all of a sudden, it's like you're taking someone who might be, again, I'm not using this analogy because I think autism is a disease, but you're taking someone who's sick and you're helping them develop health and stay healthy. You're not getting rid of the illness. You're really just encouraging health. And that's what we're trying to do, is instead of trying to get rid of the symptoms, you're trying to address each of the symptoms that are arising from the diagnosis. We're trying to establish health and what health is. And so we've been able to do that with quite a few kids, especially with the families who have really hunkered down. There's one mother, actually, she's a psychologist herself. She moved to another state when the child was kind of finished with our program, and he did so well. Now he's in high school, he's in a jazz band, he has friends, he has a romantic interest. And she keeps telling me as a joke, she's like, Jake, trust me, if you ever need anything, I'll give you a kidney.
What a wonderful outcome. As a parent, how amazing is that? When you perhaps never thought that would happen for your kiddie. That is fantastic.
And one other thing to share that too, what's really nice, when my father was alive, he passed away in 2010, I did have the opportunity to work with some of the same families that he was working with. I still get emails from them with pictures of their son graduating from his master's or PhD program. I mean, all of these things that, again, people believe that individuals with autism or autistic individuals were not capable of. Well, the truth is, if instead of forcing them outside of their comfort zone to learn a skill that they have to sit and be compliant to do, versus nurturing them within their interests and really habilitating that overall social emotional health, then we can achieve a lot greater ends for a lot of individuals that don't necessarily have to be social if they don't want to be, but at least now they have a choice.
Yes, yeah. That's a wonderful passion to have. And you can hear it, Jake. It's a wonderful passion. And it's so great to hear. Now, listen, just one more thing, because I've got listeners in Australia, because that's where I am, and you're in the States. So how do you, if someone here wanted to contact you or in another part of the world, what would they do?
So we work with a lot of international families. The first step is we often will just set up a Zoom call or WhatsApp call or something just to touch base, to get to understand the situation. And then we try to figure out the best solution for that situation. Sometimes there might be a professional locally. And I know actually there's a lot of wonderful therapists who have taken my father's online course in Australia. It's one of the more popular countries for his material, actually. The US and Australia are two of the biggest ones, actually. So it's wonderful. There's a lot of wonderful professionals using my father's work. And then the other options are, if there isn't someone locally or you wanted to work directly with us, the key ingredient is making sure that we can find some sort of regularity with which we can communicate, which with time differences can be a challenge. Yes. But actually, I have a family from Australia who was/is planning on coming to the U.S. this January to do what we call a 2-week intensive program, where for 2 weeks their child will get 3 hours a day of intervention, and the parents every other day will be getting coaching sessions. So they leave having a deep knowledge of what they need to be doing next, and the child gets a big boost therapeutically and developmentally.
Yeah. Excellent. No, that's wonderful. Well, what you've shared today is amazing, and I think there'll be a lot of people that will be very interested in this. So thank you so much for sharing today, and I look forward to talking to you again soon.
I do too, Kate. Just let me know when. Thank you.
Thanks, Jake.
All right, take care.
High-quality interactions with your child that are frequent, intentional, and individualised have been proven in many studies through early childhood development to be the most important gift that you can give your child to help them develop to their full potential. There are many resources on the internet that provide this information. I've listed a couple in the show notes that I've found to be of great interest. It's actually not that hard. Put down your devices and use your body in the way it was intended, to model and teach real communication skills to your offspring, and to show your love and connect with those around you. I'm Kate Mason. Thank you for listening to Parenting and Personalities. If you enjoyed this episode, we'd love it if you could leave a rating and a review that would help others learn about the podcast. If you're interested in discovering more about you and your family's personality types, you'll find my book, Who is This Monster or Treasure in My House, on Booktopia or Amazon. If you have an episode idea, please send a note to thepersonalitycoach@gmail.com. Many thanks to our producers at Stories and Strategies.
Love this podcast? Support it and sponsor today. Simply head to AuscastNetwork.com for details.